I came home from the hospital on a Thursday afternoon, still moving slow from the stroke, and found my own front door locked against me. Not locked like I forgot my keys somewhere. Locked like someone had deliberately changed every single deadbolt while I was laying in a hospital bed for 8 days. My son-in-law Craig was standing in the doorway with his arms crossed. Didn't offer to help me up the porch steps. Didn't ask how I was feeling. Just stood there blocking the entrance to the house I built with my own 2 hands 43 years ago. He smiled when he saw me struggling with my cane. That smile told me everything I needed to know. What he didn't know, what he couldn't have guessed, was that I'd spent every one of those 8 days in that hospital bed thinking, planning, waiting. And by the time that taxi dropped me off at my own front door, I already had everything I needed to take back what was mine. But let me back up. My name is Roy Calloway. I'm 63 years old. I spent 38 years as a carpenter in Cedar Falls, Tennessee. Started swinging a hammer at 25 and didn't stop until my knees told me it was time. Built furniture, porches, kitchen cabinets, staircases, anything you put in front of me. I could make it last a lifetime. My wife Lorraine used to say I talked to wood the way other men talked to God. She wasn't far off. I built this house in 1981. Picked out every board myself. Poured the concrete for the back porch on a Saturday in July, just me and 2 buddies and a borrowed mixer. When Lorraine first walked through the front door and saw the kitchen I'd framed out for her, she cried. "Happy tears," she said. "The good kind." Lorraine passed 3 years ago. Breast cancer. We found out in January and she was gone by September. 8 months. That's all we got between the diagnosis and losing her. Fast and cruel, the way cancer goes when it decides it's done waiting. After she died, the house got very quiet in a way I wasn't prepared for. Her reading glasses stayed on, the nightstand for months. Her garden gloves stayed hanging by the back door. I walked past them every single day, and I couldn't bring myself to touch them. That house was every memory we ever made together. It wasn't just wood and nails, it was her. My daughter Sandra is my only child. She's 41 now. Sandra married Craig Pruitt about 11 years ago. I'll be honest with you, I never fully trusted the man. Something about the way he operated. He was always working an angle, always looking for the easier path. But Sandra loved him, and that was enough for me at the time. You don't get to choose who your kids fall for. You just hope they chose wisely. About 14 months before all of this happened, Craig lost his job. He'd been in insurance sales. Sandra told me it was company downsizing, budget cuts. I found out later the truth. He'd been fired for falsifying client records. That was Craig Pruitt in a nutshell. Always cutting corners, always looking for the shortcut that would eventually cost him everything. Sandra called me crying one Sunday night. They were 2 months behind on rent and close to losing their apartment. She asked if they could stay with me for a little while, just until Craig got back on his feet and found something new. What was I supposed to say? She's my daughter. The little girl I raised on my own after her mother and I worked every angle just to keep the lights on in those early years. I said yes. I cleaned out the guest room, put fresh sheets on the bed, and told myself it would be good to have some company in that quiet house again. The first few weeks were decent enough. Sandra helped with dishes, cooked dinner a couple of nights a week. We'd sit on the porch in the evenings and talk about Lorraine, about old times. Craig mostly kept to himself. Always on his phone, he said he was working leads, making calls, lining something up. I didn't push. A man who's down on his luck doesn't need someone standing over his shoulder, but then things started to shift. Small things at first. Craig rearranged the living room one afternoon without saying a word to me. When I asked why, he said the old layout was inefficient. He started complaining about the thermostat setting, the water pressure in the shower, the way I organized the garage. One Tuesday morning I came downstairs and found that Lorraine's china cabinet, a wedding gift from her mother, something we'd had for over 40 years, had been moved down to the basement. Craig thought it was taking up too much space in the dining room, Sandra told me when I asked. Too much space. In my own house. That cabinet held 4 decades of Sunday dinners and Christmas mornings, and every birthday we ever celebrated as a family. I let it go. Told myself they were stressed. Told myself it would settle down once Craig found work. He never did. Month after month passed, and Craig never found work. Every job he looked at was too far, didn't pay enough, or was beneath his skill level. There was always a reason. Meanwhile, he sat on my couch from morning until noon, ordered takeout on my card, and acted like the house was already his. I watched it happen slowly, and I told myself to be patient. Family is family. You don't throw people out when they're struggling. Then came the stroke. I was standing at the kitchen counter on a Wednesday morning making coffee when my left side went numb all at once. The mug hit the floor, and I went down right after it. I don't know how long I was on that floor before Sandra found me. The ambulance came, and the next thing I clearly remember is a hospital ceiling and a doctor telling me it was a minor ischemic stroke. Minor. He said I was lucky, said the damage was limited, and that with rest I'd recover well. They kept me for 8 days, ran every test they had. I lay in that bed with nothing to do but think, and I thought plenty. Sandra came to visit twice. Craig came once, stood near the door for about 10 minutes, said, "Glad you're doing better," and left. He spent the whole visit looking at his phone. I noticed that. When the taxi pulled up to my house that Thursday afternoon, something felt wrong before I even opened the car door. The porch light I installed the week we moved into this house in 1981, the one Lorraine picked out from a catalog and circled in red pen, was gone, replaced with some sleek, modern fixture that looked like it belonged outside a downtown office building. I made my way up the porch steps with my cane. That's when Craig opened the door. He didn't step aside, didn't say welcome home. Just crossed his arms and looked at me the way a man looks at a problem he's already solved. "Roy," he said, "we need to talk." I looked past him into the hallway, the warm beige Lorraine had picked out for the walls when we first moved in. Gone. Repainted some cold gray color that made the whole entryway feel like a waiting room. The family photos that had lined that hallway for 30 years. Every Christmas, every birthday, our wedding portrait, all of it gone. "What happened to my house?" I said. Craig smiled. It wasn't a friendly smile. It was the smile of a man who believes he's already closed the deal. "Sandra and I talked it over while you were in the hospital," he said. "Roy, you're 63. You just had a stroke. You can't manage a property this size on your own anymore. So we're stepping up, taking over officially. Finances, maintenance, decisions. You just focus on getting your rest." I stared at him. "This is my house. My name is on the deed." Sandra appeared behind him in the hallway. My daughter. She wouldn't meet my eyes. "Dad," she said, her voice quiet. "Craig's right. It's for the best. You're not as sharp as you used to be. We're just trying to help you." Not as sharp. 2 words. They landed harder than anything a doctor had said to me in 8 days. Craig stepped aside with a little theatrical sweep of his arm. "Welcome home, Roy." I walked through that door, and my stomach dropped with every step. Lorraine's antique rocking chair, the one she nursed Sandra in as a baby, was gone from the corner of the living room. The handmade quilt her grandmother had stitched was nowhere to be seen. When I made it down the hallway to our bedroom and pushed open the door, I stopped cold. It wasn't our bedroom anymore. Craig's suits hung in the closet where my clothes used to be. His watches lined the dresser. The bed Lorraine and I had shared for decades was gone, replaced with something bigger that filled the whole room like a statement. "We moved you to the back room," Sandra said from behind me. "It's smaller but easier to manage, closer to the bathroom." The back room. The storage room. The one with no windows that faced the garden Lorraine planted the second summer we lived here. I stood there holding my cane, and I looked at Craig one more time. Really looked. I could see it clearly now, the calculation sitting just behind his eyes. He had convinced himself completely. The old man was beat. The old man had given up. The house was already his. "You're right," I said. My voice was steady. "Things are different now." He nodded, satisfied. Glad we're on the same page. He was not on any page I was writing. That night I lay on that cheap mattress in the back room and stared at the ceiling. Through the thin wall I could hear Craig laughing at something on television. In my living room. On my couch. I didn't sleep. I thought about every decision that had led to this moment, every kindness I'd extended, every warning sign I'd looked past. And I made myself a promise. No yelling, no threats, no scene. I was going to be patient. I was going to watch. And when the time came, I was going to move with precision. The next morning I drove myself to see Phil Dawson, my accountant, a man who'd handled my taxes for 20 years. I'd received a strange tax notice in the mail just before the stroke, and I wanted him to look at it. Phil pulled up my records, went quiet for a moment, then turned his monitor toward me. Someone had contacted the IRS to change my mailing address and filing information. Using my name. Without my knowledge. I thanked Phil and drove straight to First National Bank. Carol Sims, a teller who had known me for years and always asked about Lorraine before she passed, pulled up 14 months of statements and laid them on the counter in front of me. $24,500. Gone. Moved out in small, careful increments over 14 months. Some transferred to an account I didn't recognize. Some applied to credit cards I had never opened. "Who else has access to this account?" I asked, keeping my voice level. Carol typed for a moment. "Sandra Pruitt was added as joint account holder about 13 months ago. You signed the authorization form yourself, Mr. Calloway." She turned the screen toward me. There was a signature. It looked close to mine. But I have signed my name the same way my entire adult life. Roy Calloway, no, middle initial. This signature read Roy P. Calloway. A forgery. Not a careful one, but careful enough. I thanked Carol, walked back to my truck, and sat in the parking lot for a while. $24,500. The money I had set aside over decades, for emergencies, for Nolan's future, for whatever years I had left. Gone. That evening, Craig smiled at me across the dinner table. "How'd your errand go, Roy?" "Fine," I said, "just fine." I went to my room and sat on that cheap mattress until the shaking in my hand stopped. Then I picked up my phone and called my grandson. Nolan Greer is Sandra's son from her first marriage. He's 22 years old, finishing a criminal justice degree at Ohio State. He's a good kid, honest, sharp, the kind of young man who doesn't forget things. Craig had said to Sandra once, loud enough for Nolan to hear, that college was a waste of money for someone with no real ambition. Nolan heard every word. He never brought it up, but he never forgot it either. He answered on the second ring. "Grandpa, everything okay?" "I need your help," I said quietly, "and I need you to keep it just between us for now." A short pause. "Tell me everything." Nolan drove down that first weekend under the pretense of checking on me after the hospital. He brought a casserole Sandra's neighbor had made, walked in the front door with an easy smile, shook Craig's hand like everything was perfectly normal. Craig barely looked up from his phone. What Nolan actually brought, tucked into the inside pocket of his jacket, was a small digital recording device. His idea. He'd done the research before he left Columbus. "Tennessee is a one-party consent state, Grandpa," he told me quietly that evening when Craig and Sandra had gone to bed. "Only one person in the conversation needs to know it's being recorded. That person is you." I told him I consented. He showed me where the device would sit, wedged behind the corner of the cabinet above the refrigerator, angled toward the kitchen table, where Craig spent most of his mornings on the phone, small enough that you'd never notice it unless you were looking directly for it. We tested it twice. The audio was clear. Then Nolan left Sunday afternoon. Same easy smile, same casual wave from the driveway. Craig watched him go from the window and said nothing. I played the defeated old man for the next 2 weeks. I ate their meals. I watched their television. I shuffled around the house on my cane and kept my mouth shut and let Craig believe completely that the fight had gone out of me. He grew more confident by the day. Started talking openly about renovations, knocking out the wall between the dining room and the kitchen, converting the garage into something more useful. He mentioned twice, casually, like it was already settled, that I'd probably be more comfortable in an assisted living facility once my recovery was further along. Less to manage. Better care around the clock. I heard every word. I wrote everything down in a small notebook I kept under the mattress in the back room. Nolan called every other evening. Short calls, careful conversations. He was also running his own search on Craig's financial records from Columbus, pulling what he could through public databases and a contact he had at the county courthouse. What he found was not a surprise, but it was worse than I'd expected. Craig had gambling debts totaling over $28,000, owed to 3 different parties. Sandra had maxed out 3 credit cards over the previous 18 months, trying to cover the gaps. They were carrying debt to family members, to friends, and according to one document Nolan tracked down, to a private lender in Nashville, whose terms were not the kind you find at a bank. My $24,500 was not a bonus to them. It was not a convenience. It was the only thing standing between Craig Pruitt and a serious problem. The house was the rest of the plan. The recording device ran for 12 days. When Nolan came back the second weekend to retrieve it, we sat in the back room with the door closed and listened to everything together. Craig on the phone with a real estate agent, 2 days after I'd come home from the hospital. It's a solid property. 3 bedrooms, good bones, corner lot. What are we looking at in this market? Around $260,000? Good. Location like that draws developers. Craig on the phone with a lawyer 4 days later, asking about power of attorney. The situation is straightforward. He had a stroke. He's 63, lives alone, not tracking the way he used to. We're the immediate family. What kind of documentation do we need to establish decision-making authority over his assets? Craig to Sandra, in the kitchen on a Thursday evening while I was in the back room pretending to sleep. His pension covers the nursing home fees easy. We move him by spring, list the house in summer. We clear the debts and still come out ahead. It's simple. And Sandra, her voice quieter but clear. I don't want him to be hurt. Craig. He won't even know what happened until it's done. Nolan and I sat in that small room, and neither of us said anything for a moment after that last one. That's enough, I said. That's more than enough, Nolan said. I called Leonard Holt the following Monday morning. Leonard had practiced property and civil law in Cedar Falls for 35 years. He was in his late 60s, unhurried, the kind of man who let you talk without interrupting, and then took everything apart with 2 or 3 quiet questions. June's brother had used him for an estate matter years back and told me Leonard was sharp as a tack and, when the situation called for it, mean as a snake. I needed both. I drove to his office on a Tuesday and laid everything on his desk. The forged bank authorization. The account statement showing $24,500 moved out in 14 months. The IRS address change filed without my knowledge. The recordings. Nolan's documentation of Craig's debts. The notebook where I'd written down every conversation. I'd overheard. Leonard listened to all of it without saying a word. Then he leaned back in his chair and looked at me over his glasses. Roy, he said, you've got them cold. Forgery, wire fraud, elder financial abuse, conspiracy to commit fraud. We're talking felony charges on multiple counts. The recordings alone are enough to open a criminal investigation. What are my options? I asked. You press charges, he said. They go through the system. Could mean prison time, real consequences, or, he paused. You offer them a structured settlement, full restitution, immediate surrender of any claim to the property, a signed confession held in escrow. They walk away with their freedom. 1 violation of the terms and the confession gets filed. I thought about Sandra. I thought about the little girl who used to bring me dandelions from the backyard and call them flowers, holding them out in her small fist like she'd found something valuable. I thought about all of it. Then I thought about Lorraine's rocking chair sitting in a storage unit somewhere. Her quilt. The wedding photo Craig had put in a box in my own garage like it was junk. "Set up the meeting," I said. "Friday evening, at the house." Leonard nodded and reached for his pen. That Friday evening, Leonard arrived at 6:30. Nolan came with him. I answered the door myself, took their coats, and walked them into the living room like any other evening. Craig and Sandra were on the couch watching television. The dinner dishes were still on the kitchen table. Craig looked up when he saw Leonard. His eyes moved from the briefcase to my face and back again. Something shifted behind his expression. Not panic yet, but the first crack in the confidence. "What's going on?" he said. "Sit down," I said. "Both of you." My voice was quiet, steady. The same voice I used for 38 years when a measurement had to be exact and there was no room for error. They sat. Sandra looked confused. Craig looked like a man doing fast arithmetic in his head and not liking the answer he kept arriving at. Leonard placed his folder on the coffee table and sat down across from them. He didn't rush. He never rushed. "Mr. and Mrs. Pruitt," he began. "My name is Leonard Holt. I'm Mr. Calloway's attorney. What I have here is documentation of wire fraud, forgery of a financial instrument, unauthorized changes to federal tax records, and elder financial abuse. The evidence is comprehensive. It includes bank records, a forensic comparison of the forged signature, documentation of the fraudulent IRS filing, and recorded audio conversations captured legally under Tennessee's one-party consent statute." He reached into the folder and pressed play on a small recorder sitting on top of the documents. Craig's voice came out of that little speaker and filled the living room. "His pension covers the nursing home fees easy. We move him by spring. List the house in summer. We clear the debts and still come out ahead. It's simple." Sandra made a sound I had never heard from her before. Something between a breath and a word that didn't make it out. She put her hand over her mouth. Craig's jaw was tight. "That's illegal," he said. "You cannot record a private conversation without consent." "In Tennessee," Nolan said, stepping forward from where he'd been standing near the doorway. "Only one party in the conversation needs to consent to the recording. My grandfather consented." Craig turned to look at me. His face had gone through several things in the space of a few seconds, and had arrived somewhere cold and hard. "You set this whole thing up," he said. "You sat here for 2 weeks and played us." I looked at him calmly. "I came home from the hospital on crutches to find my own locks changed," I said. "You were standing in my doorway telling me my house was yours now. I did what any man does when someone comes after what he's built. I paid attention." He started to say something else. Leonard cut him off without raising his voice. "Mr. Pruitt, what you say from this point forward will be documented. I'd encourage you to listen." He laid out the terms clearly and without drama. Full repayment of $24,500 with interest, structured over an agreed schedule with automatic wage deduction. Immediate and permanent relinquishment of any claim to the property at this address. A signed written confession, notarized, placed in escrow, not filed unless the terms of the agreement were violated at any point, and both of them were to vacate the premises within 48 hours. "The alternative," Leonard said, folding his hands on the folder, "is that we proceed with criminal prosecution. Based on what we have, you are both looking at felony charges. That goes on record. That follows you. This offer does not stay open past tonight." Craig looked at the folder. He looked at the recorder. He looked at me one more time, and I think it was the first time he truly saw me. Not the old man shuffling around on a cane, not the grieving widower who'd been too soft to say no when his daughter called crying. He saw someone who had watched and waited and moved at exactly the right moment. He picked up the pen. Sandra signed first. Her hand was shaking so badly the pen scratched across the line twice before she got it right. She was crying quietly. Not dramatically, just tears running down her face while she stared at the paper. Craig signed after her. Hard, deliberate strokes. A man who'd lost and knew it, and wanted the act of losing to at least look like a choice. They were gone by Sunday afternoon. I stood on the front porch and watched them carry the last of their boxes to the car. Sandra tried to approach me one final time. She stopped at the bottom of the porch steps and looked up at me the way she used to when she was small and had done something she knew was wrong and didn't know how to begin fixing it. "Dad," she said, "please, I'm still your daughter." I looked at her for a long moment. I thought about Lorraine. I thought about what Lorraine would have said, standing beside me on this porch she loved. "You are," I said quietly. "You always will be. And that is exactly why this hurts as much as it does." Craig put his hand on her arm and steered her toward the car. He didn't look back. The car backed out of the driveway and turned down the street, and I watched it until it was gone. Then I walked back inside my house. The quiet was different this time. It wasn't the heavy quiet of grief, the kind that had settled in after Lorraine passed and stayed for months. This quiet was clean. It was mine. That evening, Nolan and I carried Lorraine's china cabinet back up from the basement. We rehung the family photos in the hallway. Our wedding portrait, Sandra's school pictures, the Christmas from 1987 where everyone is wearing the same ugly sweater because Lorraine thought it was funny. I put her reading glasses back on the nightstand, found her garden gloves right where they'd always been, hanging by the back door. I stood in the bedroom for a while. Our bedroom, the one we'd shared for decades. I'd moved our furniture back in that morning, every piece exactly where it belonged. We did it, Lorraine, I thought. We kept it. Nolan graduated that spring and moved in with me. He's working at the county prosecutor's office now, handling cases involving financial exploitation of elderly residents. Every morning we have coffee together on the front porch and watch the sun come up over the garden Lorraine planted the second summer we lived here. The tomatoes came back on their own this year, same as they always did. She always said they didn't need much tending, just consistency. Craig and Sandra settled in Indiana at his sister's place. The restitution payments come in automatically, deducted from wages, regular as clockwork. I heard through family that they separated last spring. I don't take any satisfaction in that. I take no satisfaction in any of it, if I'm being honest. 6 months after they left, my phone rang on a Sunday evening. Sandra. I answered it. She said she was sorry. She said she didn't understand how things had gotten so far, how she had let it go so far. She said she thought about her mother and about what she would have thought. She was crying again, the same quiet way she'd cried when she signed the papers. I listened to every word she said. Then I told her good night. And I hung up. People ask me sometimes whether I regret how it all ended, whether I wish I'd handled it differently, let it go, given them more time to come around on their own. And I tell them the truth every time. Forgiveness is not the same thing as forgetting. It is not the same thing as opening the door again and handing someone the key. Forgiveness is something you do for yourself, so the weight of what happened doesn't follow you around for the rest of your life. I've done that work. I'm at peace with Sandra in my own way. But I will never forget. And I will never let anyone make me feel like a stranger in my own home again. They thought they'd moved in on a tired old man. Thought a stroke and a few weeks of being shuffled to the back room would be enough to break something in me that had been built over 63 years. They were wrong about that. Real strength isn't loud. It doesn't announce itself. It shows up quiet and patient, and it waits until the moment is exactly right. My name is Roy Calloway. I built this house with my own 2 hands. I raised my daughter inside these walls. I held my wife's hand in the bedroom at the end of the hall, and this house is still mine. They came into my house looking for an easy score off an old man. What they didn't count on was that the older the man, the longer the memory, and the steadier the hand when it finally moves. If you've ever been taken advantage of by someone you trusted, I'd like to hear your story in the comments below, and if no one has told you today, you are not too old, you are not too slow, and you are not done yet. Hit subscribe if you want more stories like this one. Until next time.